Good morning, everyone. My name is Regita Permatasari, and I'm a student of Universitas 17 Agustus 1945, Surabaya. Today, I would like to discuss about one controversial provision in the Constitutional of Norway, specifically Article number 5, and compare it with the constitutional system in Indonesia. One of the most important elements of the rule of the law is the equality before the law, meaning that every person, regardless the status or position, should be accountable under the law. However, in some constitutional monarchies, there are still some provisions that give special legal protection to monarchs. One example can be found in Article number 5 of Norwegian's constitution, which states, "The king's person cannot be censured or accused. The responsibility rests with his council." At first glance, these provisions may seem reasonable within the monarchy system. However, from a modern democratic perspective, Article 5 raised several constitutional and human rights concerns. And so we will get deeper into this. Norway is known as the constitutional monarchy. This means that the country still has a king, but governmental powers are generally limited by the constitution and democratic institution. Article 5 provides legal immunity to the king. The phrase "cannot be censured or accused" means that the king cannot be sued, the king cannot be prosecuted, and the king cannot be personally held accountable before the courts. Instead, constitutional responsibility is placed upon the king's minister or councils of state. Historically, this idea came from the old European doctrine. The king can do no wrong. This doctrine was developed and preserves the dignity and stability of the monarchy. The monarch was viewed as symbol of the state, so criticizing or persecuting the king was considered equal to attacking the state itself. In practice, Norway is a democratic country where political power is mostly exercised by elected officials, not by the king personally. Therefore, supporters of Article 5 argue that this immunity is mostly symbolic and does not threaten democracy. However, even symbolic provision can still create constitutional debates. The first criticism is that Article 5 appears inconsistent with the principle of the rule of the law. In democratic legal system, no one should be above the law. Every citizen, government official, and state institution should be legally accountable. However, Article 5 creates a special exception for the king. This becomes problematic because ordinary citizens can be prosecuted, ministers can be impeached, but the king receives absolute immunity. This situation may undermine the idea of equality before the law. From a constitutional law perspective, legal immunity without accountability can potentially create an imbalanced power. Even if the king rarely exercises political power directly, the constitutional text still places the monarch in privileged legal position. The second criticism concerns democratic legitimacy. Modern democracies are based on popular sovereignty, meaning political authority should come from the people. However, monarchy is hereditary. The king is not elected by citizens, but inherits the throne by the bloodline. When hereditary rulers are granted legal immunity, critics argue that this creates a democratic contradiction. Unelected authority, combined with the legal protection from prosecution, Although Norway functions democratically in practice, Article 5 still reflects remnants of feudal constitutional tradition. Another issue is accountability. Article 5 transfers responsibility to the Council of the State. This means that ministers are politically responsible for action formally carried out by the king. But critics argue that this arrangement creates indirect accountability. If a constitutional crisis were to occur involving the monarch personally, there is no clear mechanism for holding the king accountable. This could potentially create legal uncertainty. From a human rights perspective, legal immunity may conflict with the principle of equal protection under the law. International human rights principles emphasize equality, non-discrimination, and access to justice. Giving one individual permanent immunity because of birth status may appear incompatible with modern human rights standards. But to be fair, we should also consider arguments supporting Article 5. Supporters argue that the king is mostly ceremonial. Real political powers belong to parliament and the ministers. Therefore, immunity does not create practical danger. They also claim that the monarchy symbolizes national unity. Political neutrality must be protected, and legal attacks against the monarchs could destabilize the state. In this perspective, Article 5 functions as a constitutional protection for national stability rather than personal privilege. Furthermore, Norway consistently ranks among the world's strongest democracy, indicating that constitutional monarchy can coexist with democratic governance. Now, let us compare with the system in Indonesia. Indonesia is a republic and not a monarchy. According to the 1945 Constitution, sovereignty belongs to the people. Unlike Norway, Indonesia does not recognize hereditary leadership. The President of Indonesia is elected directly by the citizens, serves for limited terms, and can be held constitutionally accountable. This creates a major difference between the two systems. Indonesia strongly emphasizes equality before the law. Article 27, paragraph 1 of the Indonesian Constitution states that all citizens shall be equal before the law and the government. This means that no person is theoretically above the law, including the president. Although the presidents enjoy limited constitutional protection while in office, these protections are not absolute like Article 5 of Norway. A president can still be impeached, be investigated, and be removed from the office under the constitutional procedures. In Indonesia, presidential accountability is regulated by constitutional mechanism. Under Articles 7A and 7B of the 1945 Constitution, President may be removed for treason, corruption, bribery, serious crimes, or misconduct. The process involves the House of Representatives, the Constitutional Court, and the People's Consultative Assembly. This mechanism demonstrates that even the highest executive authority remains constitutionally accountable. In contrast, Article 5 of Norway provides immunity without a direct impeachment mechanism against the king personally. Another interesting comparison concerns the role of the head of the state. In Norway, the king symbolizes national unity, but political responsibility belongs to the ministers. But in Indonesia, The president is both head of state and head of the government. Therefore, political and legal accountability are attached directly to the president. This reflects two different constitutional philosophies. Norway separates symbolic authority from political accountability, and Indonesia combines both within the elected presidency. So, in conclusion, Article 5 of the Norwegian Constitution grants immunity to the king by declaring that the monarch cannot be censured or accused, while responsibility rests with the Council of the States. Historically, this provision was intended to protect the stability and dignity of the monarchy. However, from a modern constitutional perspective, it raises several criticisms. It challenges equality before the law, weakens direct accountability, and reflects remnants of hereditary privilege. When compared with Indonesia, significant differences appear. Indonesia emphasized popular sovereignty, constitutional accountability, and legal equality for all state officials, including the president. Ultimately, this comparison teaches us that constitutional system evolve differently, depending on history, culture, and political tradition. However, accountability and the rule of law remain essential foundation for any democratic state. So, that is all that I can discuss today about the Article 5 of Norway. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.